There is a sound at the top of the world tonight, something like 100 tiny fingers knocking on glass. It comes and goes in careful, patient taps, a slow Morse that the lighthouse understands better than most people. The lantern hums beneath it, a low, steady voice that Lily has learned to answer without thinking, and the frost that has gathered in lace on the panes makes patterns like a shy constellation. Lily wakes with the light already warm at her shoulder. The house is not asleep so much as folding itself inward. Quilts smoothed, the kettle's soft breathing in the kitchen, the sand globe on the shelf waiting to be turned. She sits for a moment with her feet wrapped in a thick pair of socks, palms cupped round the teapot as though holding sun. The teapot is a familiar weight. The handle is smooth where hands have found it for years. She measures sugar the way some people measure out promises. 1 small spoonful for herself, 2 for anyone who will stay, and an extra for a child who always asks for the sweet part of everything. Outside, the frost presses its face to the mullioned windows, tiny spikes and frosted flowers at the edges. Inside, there are lamplights, small, flat lamps that burn steady and low, clustered like a miniature constellation on the common room table. Lily sets them out as one might arrange friends around a small table. A lamp for warmth, a lamp for reading, a lamp for sewing, a lamp that will be left on the sill like a watchman. She winds the wick on each, checks the glass chimneys, and gives each lamp a little tap to settle the flame. The lamp hums, answer the lantern's deeper tone, and together they keep a softness in the air that seems to make the frost quieter. On the shelf beside the teapot sits the sand globe, its slow grain a private metronome. Lily turns it with a thumb that knows the weight of each grain. It slips, a pale ribbon of time, and she reads the hour as one might read the mood of a room. The sand runs, the kettle's whisper grows together with the turning, and she breathes with them, long and gentle. The ritual is small and exacting. Measure sugar, slide the spoon across the rim, stir clockwise 2 1/2, hold the cup to the light to see the tea's honey color. Place it on the saucer just so. The simplicity of these acts is an anchor for a house on the edge of the sea. If you like, lower your lamp and stay with us for this drift. Neighbors arrive as they always do, slowly, by degrees, like tides. They do not come in with haste, but with small offerings. A jar of pear jam, a coil of rope trimmed neatly, a packet of dried chamomile tied in twine. Seamus shuffles in first, boots leaving minuscule white prints on the mat. He moves with the sort of deliberate economy that has been earned across many winters. Slow fingers, pockets that hold the right thing at the right time. He hangs his coat on the peg and lets down the leather roll from his shoulder, which smells faintly of oil and weather. Inside that roll is a strip of leather he has kept for occasions much like this. Sturdy, warm, the sort that listens when a seam needs making. Rose arrives next, carrying a pot wrapped in cloth. Her hands are always dusted with an island of green that does not wash away with the tide. She tips the cloth back, and a little spray of moss-bright leaves peeps out. A plant that has learned to live on sill water and good conversation. Rose sets it on the windowsill, where the frost's lace meets earthen green. She walks with the ease of someone who tends things that keep a long time, and she brings with her threads of translucent color, the sort used to sew light catches and hem the edges of curtains. She smiles at Lily, and the room seems to breathe easier. The twins, Mara and Joss, explode in afterward, as bright as a pair of tiny comets that orbit any room they enter. They carry with them a small basket of things they have made. Baubles of ice-painted glass, strings of tiny prisms that catch the lamplight, scraps of ribbon whose ends are frayed with the earnestness of much handling. They speak in quick, low bursts, building a small private music that only the other children in the room can translate. Mara tucks a prism under Lily's cup, an offering, half a charm, half a dare, while Joss hides a paper boat under the tea towel as though the kitchen table were sea. The common room fills in the way seawater fills shells, slowly enough to hold a new weight. Conversation is quiet and precise, like people who do not want to disturb the lantern's hum. They talk in small currents. The boy from the fishing village across the headland has mended his nets. There is a story about a runaway pot of porridge that turned into breakfast for 3 stray cats. Seamus has found an old brass button in the sand that might make an excellent clasp. Laughter here is a single, gentle ripple. Brief, warm, never sharp. Lily moves among them like a seam that holds. She pours tea, hands out cups, folds a shawl over a neighbor's knees when the draught stirs. Her hands are quick in the particular ways that kindness needs. She spreads butter on crusty bread without asking. She helps thread a needle for an aging neighbor whose fingers have thickened with cold. She arranges the small lamps into a crescent on the table, as if to gather the light inward, so the fondness in the room ricochets off glass and cloth and settles on each face. Their rituals form a quiet map of care. There is the counting of teaspoons, 1 for thought, 2 for warmth, that Lily says under her breath like a spell. There is the turning of the sand globe at the same time every evening, a slow hour to mark the margin between wakefulness and the harbor of rest. There is the custom of cutting the last slice of bread into the smallest possible wedges, and letting the eldest small person choose who gets the largest. These are not grand rites. They are stitches that bind a number of small lives into one steady thing. It is only when the light begins to set that Lily notices the hairline seam. She had been standing by the lantern-room window, cup at her lips, watching the frost draw new filigree along the inner pane. The seam is almost a memory of itself, a whisper of a line, and almost not there, like a shadow where 2 bubbles of glass once met and settled. For a moment she thinks it is merely a trick of the lantern's light, or the way the frost throws its long veils. Then the wind catches, and a finger of colder air slides through it, so slight that you might miss it if you were not the sort of person who counts teaspoonfuls. The crack is small enough to be foolish, and large enough to be noticed. She sits the cup down carefully, setting it on the saucer not to startle anyone, and draws her shawl closer. There is a minute motion in her hands, an old practiced assessment that needs no alarm in its face. The lantern hum answers the new cold with a slight, steady thrum as if concentrating itself. Lily knows what should be done in an ideal world. Take down the lanterneer's ladder, haul the brass, lay a backing leather and seal with a careful hand. But there is a kettle steaming, a child whose story is half told, and would bloom only if listened to now, and the counting of sugar has not yet reached the moment of 2. Community, she thinks, is a slow machine. It is not a single clever hand, but the passing back and forth of small favors. She chooses the company first. Seamus notices the seam before anyone else, as if his pockets have an extra sense for flaws. He is the sort of neighbor who keeps the right thing at the right time, and his eyes find the faint line on the lantern dome with practiced calm. He leans on the workbench, fingers resting on the leather roll, and says in that careful, gravel-soft voice of his, "A thin thing, that, not urgent." there is no alarm in him. The words lay flat in the air like warmed bread. True and entirely manageable. Rose comes and cups the warmth of the plant pot as if feeling out the edges of an issue by the roots. "We'll stitch it," she says, offering almost a smile, and the idea arrives like a warm scarf slid around the neck of the room. Make of it something pretty. Her hands are already thinking in thread, pulling at the cloth of a shawl as explanation, testing how translucent thread will hold a caught breath of light. Mara and Joss, upon hearing of a seam, think immediately of adornment. "We could hang prisms," insists Mara, eyes bright with the possibility of turning a small problem into an excuse for sparkle. Joss nods, mindful of the way light loves to find new faces. They produce their basket with ceremonious clatter, their objects carefully wrapped like fragile promises. The twins' enthusiasm is an excellent sort of coercion. It makes practical tasks feel like play. Even as the small household rituals continue, there is a redirection of attention that is not abrupt but becomes inevitable. Spoons pause mid-stir. A story drops to a quieter thread. Someone offers the tea. No, let Lily keep her hands free. The sand globe continues to pour its patient grain of time, a hushed witness to the subtle new choreography. People move with the deliberate slowness of those who are careful not to alarm a sleeping thing. They gather materials as one might gather thoughts before speaking a truth. Seamus with his leather strip rolled and oiled, the leather carrying faint memories of rope and salt. Rose with her translucent thread and the tiny scissors that have never been blunt. Mara and Joss with prisms and colored ribbon. A neighbor from the harbor brings a breath of cotton padding wrapped in linen, small and honest. As dusk becomes a deeper sort of evening, the lantern's circle of light is more intimate than usual. The frost outside draws heavy curtains of patterned white, and when the wind lifts, the lantern hum answers with a higher note. The tiny tapping continues, hundreds of minute knocks that seem to say nothing harmful, but everything persistent. Lily stands at the base of the lantern room staircase and looks up through the glass. The seam is there, a hairline arc that catches the amber light in a thin, stubborn gleam. It looks like a blush across the lantern's cheek. She thinks briefly of doing the repair herself. Lily has hands that know how to modify, to make small alterations. Patch hems, fix a button, tuck a child into a blanket. She has done things in this tower that were small and quiet and, in their smallness, heroic. Mending a rope that the tide had nicked, sewing a lamp chimney that cracked at the wrong hour. But tonight the list of obligations is soft and long. The twins have promised a new tale to be finished. There is a neighbor who prefers company at this hour, and the sand globe will run dry if they do not turn it in time for the lullaby that marks the half hour before bed. She balances the immediate against the practical and decides, with the patience of someone who has learned to distribute attention like a warm blanket, to wait until the later watch. Others do not wait as much as they gather. The decision to repair becomes communal without anyone needing to decide out loud. Objects move from hands to table. Leather unrolls into a warm brown strip that smells of the outside world. The translucent thread spills from its bobbin like a thread of moonlight. A small brass button clinks as it is exchanged between palms. The cotton padding is teased into soft fullness. The little pillow that will sit between the lantern's glass and the leather backing. Conversation turns practical with the same low volume as before. There is no sense of hurry. The speed is measured and careful, an economy that weighs each action against the comfort of the whole. Lily watches them prepare with an odd, quiet gladness. Repair in this house is not a task to be done and forgotten. It is a joining, hands reaching across a problem to make of it something that binds. It is the neighbor who has an exacting eye for the right brass who offers the button. It is Rose who suggests a slip of clear film to foil the cold while they stitch the leather. It is Seamus who produces, from the depths of his roll, the right kind of waxed thread for strength. The twins supply the decoration, bright ribbons and prisms that will catch single blades of light and scatter them through the common room like safe, indoor snow. They lay materials out on the table as if for a small feast. Leather beside white cotton, brass beside translucent thread, tiny lamps tucked in as companions. Lily turns the sand globe and watches the grains fall more slowly now, committing time to the knead. The kettle is at half singing, steam curling in a shape that might be a question mark. They prepare as people prepare for a gentle pilgrimage. Nothing is dramatic, and yet everything is weighty because it is done together. There is a rhythm to the actions that begins to form. A chorus of small sounds that could be mistaken for nothing if you were not listening. The hum of the lantern, the soft rasp of leather laid upon wood, the whisper of thread through cloth, the clink of the brass button as it is set in a small dish. Fingers learn the language of each other again in these moments. The quick grip, the steadying hand, a thumb that knows when to let go and when to press. Voices lower and fall into the cadence of work talk that is more like a lullaby than instruction. They speak in fragments that are more about comfort than direction. Turn it a little. There, softly. Not too tight, not too loose, said in tones that mean something more than the words. As they move toward the lantern room, the small procession that half carries, half cradles the leather and the button, there is a gentle sense of procession. The twins trail behind with a string of prisms that jingle like a shy bell. Rose carries the film as if it were a scroll of future light. Seamus bears the leather strip like an offering. Lily takes the lantern key between her fingers, the way a person might hold a compass. She feels the coolness of the metal and the little indents that fit her thumb. The lantern hum seems to change its pitch, as though receiving their attention and answering with a tone that is patient and pleased. They climb the narrow stairs together, steps that know the weight of many feet, and remember where hands have left the rail smooth. The light from the lamps pools at their feet, and the frost taps like a polite, patient audience. At the top, the lantern room opens to them like a second skin. From within the glass, the town, if you can call the few houses around the headland a town, glows with dim pinpricks. Beyond that, the sea is a muted plain that a map might have forgotten, folded and refolded. The crack looks different from here. Thinner, but with a tiny glint of something like promise tucked at its edge, an invitation rather than a wound. They stop to look. There is a hush that falls between them, a pause that is not empty but full of the things in their pockets. Memory, care, the readiness to attend. Lily reaches out as if to trace the seam with her fingertip, but she does not touch the glass. Willful gentleness keeps her fingers away. Instead, she runs her other hand along the inside frame where the lens sits, feeling the familiar curve and the little dents that tell the story of centuries of wind. The lantern hum deepens, and, for a small, private moment, Lily imagines the light as a throat, clearing itself for song. Seamus lays the leather against the inner sill and tests its fit without words, corner upon corner. Rose holds the film up and watches it catch and carry the lantern's light. The twins hold the prisms up so they scatter warm shards across the room. A plan forms in the quiet, modest as a loaf. Reinforce the seam, cushion it from the wind with cotton, stitch the leather as a second skin, and dress it with the twins' prisms, so that what was once a flaw becomes a small, deliberate ornament. Lily thinks of the lantern like a living thing now, as the others do too. Something that has a voice and that sometimes needs persuasion rather than repair. She thinks of all the little frays in people as well, the edges that need binding, the nights when someone needs tea and a listening ear more than anything. And she is struck by how similar mending a glass can feel to mending a heart. Tending to both requires a steady hand and the willingness to set aside one's own agenda. It is not a dramatic sort of heroism. It is a turnkey kind. The lantern glass is cold at the edge where the seam shows. A tiny breath of colder air nudges in, and the lamps at the table below answer with a slight pitch, as if warning them to be careful with their next steps. There is stillness long enough for Lily to hum a small fragment of a tune she used to hear her grandmother sing, a half-line that smells of lemon peel and old quilts. The sound stitches the air a little. It is barely more than a thread, but it steadies the hands. Seamus readies his waxed thread. Rose prepares a loop of the translucent kind so that stitches will vanish like small kindnesses. The twins tuck prisms into their pockets where they rustle like promises. The ladder is set against the inner casing, its rungs old with the shape of many wells. They will not hurriedly climb. Haste would break the gentle orchestration they have built. Instead, they take one rung at a time, not so much as counting the steps as honoring each movement. Lily pauses on the step and looks down over the gathered faces, each lit with firelight, each patient and small and very human. She feels an ache that is not fear, but a tender, filling warmth. The kind of ache that comes from seeing the right people in the right place at the right time, from noticing that the seams in life are where everyone's hands meet. She thinks of the little things that mend a house into a home, a shared joke, the perfect cup of tea, a coat that smells of a storm outside and a safe inside. She thinks of how the lighthouse keeps a constant bearing for others, and how wonderfully apt it is that tonight it asks for their help in return. They begin the work in a hush. The leather unrolls like a small sung prayer and settles over the seam. Fingers, all different sizes and ages, press and test, pat and hold. Thread slips, and Rose murmurs a direction about tension that is more like affection than instruction. The thread pulls through cloth with an almost inaudible sound, a series of tiny knocks that answer, faintly, the ice outside. The brass button is set into place, not for its necessity alone, but because small, bright things make a place that has been mended into something to be proud of. It is at the moment when the first stitches are taken that the lantern hum seems to swell in approval. The frost taps softer, as if listening. Outside the glass, the night presses its face to the panes, and the tide keeps its slow accord. Inside, hands work together, and the twins hang the prisms in a careful line along the leather's edge. The prisms catch the lamplight and scatter it like a quiet applause, turning the seam into a band of deliberate splendor. But there is more than the immediate task in the air. A thin, delicate notion hangs between them. What they are mending is not only glass. There are other seams that might be eased. Old rivalries in the small town across the headland. A woman who has been sleeping less of late. A boy who has forgotten how to laugh. The repair they are making tonight will do its small part in the larger geometry of their lives. It will be a knot in a safety net, another place to take hold of when things brood outside. This thought makes Lily's chest feel broadened, the way an oarsman feels the boat steady under his hands. They have not yet finished. The leather is pinned in place, the obvious reinforcements made, but there remains the delicate task of threading that will hold the work together against wind and the long pressure of winter. The lamps at the table send up their steady light. Someone slides another plate of biscuits toward the middle so that hands can take a break if they need. The twins keep brightening up their faces, eager and hopeful that their prisms will change the world, ever so slightly, by scattering small seas of light. Lily leans her forehead against the cool inside of the lantern casing for a single moment before the final stitches. Her breath fogs the glass with the brief warmth of a thought. For a pulse, she allows the mind to wander over all the small things that have put them here. Old tales of rescuing owls from chimneys, the time a ladder snapped, and someone's hand saved a small life. The winter when the kit from Seamus's roll fixed 6 things in as many nights. These are not grand heroic stitches in a storybook sense. They are the soft, relentless work that keeps places safe inside a storm. A new gust arrives, and with it a certain clarity. The lantern hum tightens its note ever so slightly, and the frost all but holds its breath. Overhead, the seam, now half-dressed in leather and thread, shows both the mending and the memory of the break. It is in that fragile, halfway state that Lily feels both the weight of responsibility and the comfort of the company around her. They are neither hurried nor complacent, merely very much together. Outside, the world is a quiet mass of cold and sea. Inside, there are movements and preparations, and the feel of a plan that will be executed by hands who love the work more than they love the credit. The final stitches wait for the steadying of a hand. The brass will be set and the film smoothed, and the prisms will be arranged so they catch the first slant of morning light as though to mock the frost with their cheer. But that is a task that must be begun with a measured pause. They take that pause together, not as a shirking of duty, but as a ceremony of preparation. Lily's fingers hover over the waxed thread. Seamus's thumb finally settles on the brass button as though to bless it with finality. Rose tightens the film and nods, satisfied with the way it takes the light without a fight. The twins, full of expectation, exchange a secret smile, as if they have already decided on the pattern of ribbons. Lily inhales the room's small bouquet of smells: wax, tea, leather, the slight green of Rose's plant, and the icy scent that finds its way even through the lantern's seals. She feels the kind of tired that is warm, the excellent weariness of a day that has been meaningfully lived. She thinks of the lamp hum as a lullaby for those who keep watch, and of the sand globe she will turn once the final stitch is done. She thinks, too, of the way the lantern will look afterward, wrapped in its leather band and trimmed with tiny prisms, like an old person wearing a new brooch. They are ready to continue. The air crackles not with alarm, but with the quiet thrill that comes from doing something together. The frost outside makes its last polite taps of the evening on the glass. The lantern hum leans into them with a low, approving tone. They lift their hands once more to the seam, fingers poised to pull thread through leather, to tug, to press, to make the work in earnest. If you found this light easing your evening, a soft follow keeps the lamp lit for more nights like this. They bent to the seam with hands that knew how to be careful. The lantern room smelled of warm wax and the thin metallic tang that came from brass set close to cold glass. Beneath that was the faint green of Rose's plant, and the sweet note of tea gone soft with time. Fingers threaded the waxed cord, while a small private chorus of murmurs went on. Soft advisories, names of colors, a word of praise if a stitch lay true. The thread slid through leather and film, and the old wooden frame as if writing something tender in invisible ink. Seamus moved with a steadiness that had the hush of routine about it. He held the leather strip where Lily's fingers could press it flat, and he spoke only when his voice fit the silence. "There," he would say, and Lily would feel the word like a small stone placed to steady the center of a bowl. His hands were large and careful. When they found the place to knot the thread, he drew the waxed cord taut, and trimmed it with the gentleness of someone who had cut tea leaves for other people's cups. He had, in the depths of his roll, a small tool the shape of a spoon that he used to press thread down into seam without bruising it. It was the sort of instrument that made the difference between work that would last and work that would simply be hurried away with time. Rose kept her hands lit with a different attentiveness. She held the translucent thread between thumb and forefinger as if it were a strand of dawn. It lay almost invisible except where lamplight touched it and made it a thing of subtle purpose. When she spoke, her words were given like a pattern. A small hint of tension here, a softer pull there. She had a way of talking to cloth that made it agree to bend and hold. People always said she soothed even stubborn hems into place. At one point, she pressed the film against the glass and watched how the lantern's amber skated across it, testing how much warmth it would admit and how much chill it might keep back. Her smile, when it came, was private as a sunrise. The twins were all movement, 2 quick pulses of energy in the room. When Lily made the first heavy stitch that would hold the leather's weight against the lantern's frame, Mara clapped softly, and Joss whistled in a small, triumphant note. They tied their prisms to a length of ribbon already looped in a careful braid. The prisms jangled and caught the lamplight in tiny, bright punctuation marks. They worked on the trimming all the while, finding a rhythm in small fingers that could tie a knot dearer than words. Between stitches they supplied a commentary, some of it true, some of it invented as a way to make ordinary things sound like adventures. "This one will show sailors the way if they are lost," Joss announced, and everyone told him he was right, because it was kinder to be right than to correct. It was not a loud industry. The sounds could have been missed by anyone not listening for them. The soft rasp of thread, the precise scrape of a needle, the low thunk of a button set down into a saucer. The lantern hum wove through these sounds like a steady heartbeat, and the frost outside kept its polite tapping on the glass as if it were an interested bystander taking notes. Occasionally, someone would stop to drink tea, the cup making a neat little sound against saucer, or to take a biscuit and return to their work. Time was given to the task. They did not hurry to hide the seam as if shameful. Rather, they worked to make the seam proud. Leather was molded and eased until it sat like a new skin. Rose's film was smoothed in the small, round motions of waiting hands so that no wrinkle would trap a breath of cold. The waxed thread fitted into the stitches as if the work itself had been waiting for just that kind of cord, strong and pliant. Seamus tied a knot that he had learned from a man who had once mended sails in a harbor across the headland. The knot had the look of something both practical and tender. When at last a row of stitches held the leather in place, the twins hung a prism at each end. The prisms were not many, but they were chosen with the particular zeal that children bring to selection. The odd one with a flaw that caught light in a special way, the smallest that threw bright commas across the stillness. They fixed the ribbon with a small brass button that Seamus pressed into place, the button making a tiny, decisive click, as if it were glad of being useful. Then Rose suggested the fabric finish, and everyone agreed because it sounded right. There would be a soft cover, a band of old cloth that would both protect and adorn. A last flourish to say the seam had been seen and loved rather than merely repaired. Lily produced from a drawer a shawl she had been saving for nothing in particular, a square of wool with a faint pattern of faded waves that had once belonged to an aunt who stitched stories into hems. They folded it, trimmed a stray, and pinned it to the leather's edge before any needle passed through. The act of dressing the lantern changed the tone, as if the lighthouse had been waiting for an audience. They placed the fabric over the seam, and the twins began to arrange the prisms along the edge like a child making a crown. Seamus threaded the brass button through and pushed it home with a small, approving hum. Rose braided a length of translucent thread into a little cord and looped it through the upper corner of the shawl. The cord caught the lantern's light and looked almost like spun sugar. Lily pressed the last stitch home and felt, in the muscles of her forearm, the satisfying tug that comes from work finished well. When the last thread lay hidden, and the leather felt secure against the cold's persistent interest, someone, no one could quite say who, lifted the small battery lamps from the table, and they were placed one by one along the inner sill. The lamps were tiny, the sort designed to glow rather than burn, and their light pooled like coins. When switched on, they added their modest voices to the lantern's hum, and the prisms answered with small explosions of brightness that moved across the common room and onto the faces gathered there. The seam, once a freckle of imperfection, now had a border of deliberate beauty. A leather cuff, a shawl pinned like a ribbon, prisms that made a quiet show of light. Where the crack had been, now there was a new pattern to admire. It felt like a small coronation. Someone produced biscuits and slices of jam, a thermos of hot spiced cider, and a pot of chamomile sweetened with little threads of honey. They set them in the middle of the table as if to consecrate the result. Lily distributed cups with the same calm care she had applied to all other small rituals that night. A saucer that made a neat little sound, a spoon laid at right angles, a napkin folded like a page. They ate and drank, and there was, in the eating, a distinct softness, an indulgence not of extravagance but of gratitude. They celebrated in the manner of people for whom celebration need not be loud to be true. Mara climbed on a chair and sang a little nonsense song about a lighthouse that wore a hat, and the room laughed quietly because the joke was not what mattered so much as the joining. Joss tapped 2 spoons together and made a rhythm for them to hum along. Seamus, usually economical with such things, told a story about a colt he once rescued from a hedge with nothing but a length of rope and a patient friend. His voice held the fondness of memory rather than boast. Rose, cheeks flushed with warmth, and the small exertion of her fingers, offered a line of verse she liked. Short, ocean-shaped words that made everyone fall pleasantly still for a moment. The air filled with their small music, hummed tunes, the clink of cups, the soft conversation of people who had tied themselves to one another with a series of helpful acts. The lantern hum seemed to carry their small joy outward, not as a shout, but as a steady beacon. Outside, the frost tapped slower, as if it admired what had been done. The prisms threw little, bright flecks across the ceiling and each person's face. The light made freckles of the dust in the air, and for a time the room looked like a slow snowfall trapped inside glass. They ate until the plates grew empty, and then passed them around again, the ritual of passing as important as the food itself. At one point, Lily rose and went to the window, her cupped hands folded about a cooling cup. She watched the small town, 3 or 4 houses leant into the stoop of the shore, blink lights like shy companions. She thought of the way the seam, once a small worry, had become a thing that now spoke of care. The thought lodged pleasantly in her chest, that work done together became less about the fixing, and more about the remembering. Each stitch was a history of hands, each prism a small testament to what people could make from available odds and ends. When the last biscuit had been offered, and the last cup drained into a cup rim's shadow, the room made the soft business of clearing up. They rolled up the leather's remaining scrap into Seamus's roll and handed the scissors back to Rose, who tucked them in her apron in the way of people who trust their own implements. The twins took their basket of unspent prisms and tucked it under a bench. They would later hang the spare pieces in their window at home, they promised, the same way people promise to keep a candle lit for a friend. One by one, people said their soft good nights, not in the manner of departing with a finality, but as if one were gently closing doors that would open again. Seamus collected his coat with the small ceremony of peeling on a thing that had been in the way of movement. Rose patted her plant and wrapped it in its cloth before tucking it under her arm. The twins were willed into the cold by their parents' gentle insistences. They did not protest for long, both already thinking of their beds and the day's small triumph. The harbor neighbor, who had brought the cotton padding, kissed Lily's cheek in a way that was half thanks and half farewell, and stepped out into the night with a muffled, contented smile. The ancient stairway remembered each footstep, and they descended into the common room with the modest gravity of a retreading. The lantern's glow stayed as a steady presence above them, and when the final door closed, there was a new hush. Lily, watching the way the light had been changed, felt the warm, satisfying ache of completion in her shoulder, and a flutter, the small kind that comes when one notices the shape of a day finished in the service of others. She tidied the table with hands that knew the order of things. She set the empty saucers on the shelf, folded the napkins into modest squares, and placed them in a drawer, carried the thermos back to the kitchen where it gave a small, contented clink. She cleaned one lamp chimney and set the lamp on the sill to keep a friendly glow while she checked the lantern from below. Seamus paused in the doorway and said quietly that he should go on and check the nets in the morning. Rose promised to bring a sprig of sea rosemary for the small corner herb bed. The twins waved from the frozen porch, and Joss blew a small, secretive kiss to the lantern as if to say thank you. When the house settled with the hush of a thing that had been well fed with attention, Lily climbed the steps to the lantern room to see their work from the outside. The wind had slackened into a gentler temperament. Ice still adorned the panes, but it looked as if it had been politely asked to keep its distance. The seam, dressed in leather, shawl, and prisms, took on a new personality. What had been a barely there break now read as an intentional band, an accent added to a face. The lantern hum seemed to approve in a low, fond tone. Lily walked the circumference of the room, and let her hands rest on the glass where frost made soft ridges. When she pressed lightly, the prisms quivered and threw slow, safe lightning across the floor. For a moment she imagined the shelter of the sea itself pressing its forehead to the lighthouse, not in anger, but in a kind of gentle curiosity. That thought pleased her in ways small and large. She liked the idea that the outside world could be both indifferent and interested, and that inside the tower their small attentions made a difference. There was one last small business to be done before bed. The sand globe on the shelf waited with its patient small bones. Lily lifted it and turned it so that the pale grains began again their slow, reliable fall. The motion was private and ceremonious. Each time she watched the sand, she counted not only the minutes but the meaning of time in a house like theirs. The turning would be her signal to begin the ritual that moved from public to private. The final cup, the low lamp on the sill, a small melody hummed into a pillow. She brewed a single cup of tea, a very small cup for her own steadiness. The leaves she chose were of the chamomile that had been passed around earlier. She let it steep until the kitchen filled with the familiar, sleep-friendly scent. She measured a single spoonful of sugar, unconsciously following the counting she had made into the room's rhythm. 1 for thought, 2 for warmth. The cup warmed her palms as she took it back up the narrow stairs, and the light along the way pooled comforting and modest. Back in the lantern room, she set the cup carefully on the sill where the prisms made a soft, complicated lace. She lit a tiny lamp, one she kept for this particular hour, and set it near the cup so the two lights might keep one another company. The lantern above them threw a comfortable amber down, and the room felt as though it had become the inside of a beloved book. Pages you could press between fingers and smell of paper and time. Lily sat on the narrow bench and wrapped the shawl about her knees, letting its wool itch softly in a way that made her smile at a private memory. She rested her forehead against the warm glass where no crack now showed a worry of wind. She thought of the different hands that had passed stitches and stories through the evening. She thought of Seamus's quietness, Rose's delicate skill, the twins' bright mischief, the neighbors' soft gratitude. A contentment, wide and gentle, settled into her like a child into sleep. She hummed a melody that had come to her in a half-remembered thread earlier. Her grandmother's tune, perhaps, or a folk line from a distant harbor. The sound was small, almost a whisper, and the lantern took it in like a lover hearing a secret. Her breathing matched the rhythm she hummed, long out, longer in. In the silence that followed each phrase, the sound of the frost tapping resumed, as patient and as polite as ever, and the lantern hummed its slow response like the earth's own lullaby. There was a small pause in which Lily allowed herself to list the comforts she would fold into sleep. The shawl's warmth, the cups emptying that would make room for quiet, the knowledge of friends on the stairs below, the fact of the repaired seam bright with prisms. The lighthouse itself was a presence felt underfoot, a rounded, steady thing that measured nights with the same plain duty as a clock. She felt safe in a way that was not the brash safety of guarantees, but the steadier kind that comes from being attended to by other people and by small, reliable rituals. If you like, the narrator had whispered earlier, you would lower your own lamp and breathe with us. Lily now drew breath, as if she were inviting the whole world to match it. A long intake of cold, a slow release of warmth. Each inhale took away some of the day's small concerns. Each exhale returned a quiet steadiness to her chest. The sand globe, unnoticed in the dim, continued to measure out its patient sand. She put her cup down at last and tucked her fingers around it as if to keep the heat. Her eyes moved over the room one more time, cataloging the small bright proofs of the evening. The leather's seam, the brass button at its heart, the shawl's soft hem, the line of prisms catching the light in a deliberate, celebratory arc. Her gaze softened on the prisms. In them she saw not only reflected light but the faces of the people who had made them. Tiny, bright affinities. The thought warmed her like a hand on the back. Before she climbed the stairs to her narrow sleeping loft, she took a last look at the lantern's glass from the inside, testing the way the new cover wore its role. It did not hide the seam, but honored it, and the pirates of perfect repair would find it lovely for its character rather than for its flawlessness. Lily felt like that herself, a person patched with necessary kindness, adorned by friends, made safer by the company she kept. Her private ritual was small and precise. She turned the sand globe once more so that the grains would mark the small span of night she intended to spend awake, then set it back on its shelf. She arranged a low lamp on the sill outside her loft door so that its light would spill down the stair and keep a soft watch. She folded her shawl into a neat square at the foot of her quilt and smoothed the bed with the practiced motion of someone who sleeps lightly and wakes without drama. She tucked her slippers beneath the bed and draped a small cloth over the bedside shelf, an offering for the next morning's teapot. In the last minute before sleep, she paused at the loft's little window. The frozen panes had taken on a delicate, filigreed bloom that looked like the inside of a lace-maker's dream. The prism's light danced across the ice, and the lantern's hum glowed like an ember warmed into song. She kissed the edge of the glass by habit, not because it needed it, but because it was her custom, and the touch felt like checking the bridge before stepping across. A small, sensible ritual that made the crossing into sleep feel secure. Lily lay down with the quilt pulled high and the lamp left low. She listened to the tower breathe, the settling of wood in the cold, the faint creak where old beams remembered storms, the lantern's steady hum, and the occasional respectful tap of ice on the paned glass. In that orchestra of small, ordinary sounds, she found a piece that had the texture of well-worn cloth, familiar, comforting, stitched into the body of the house itself. She thought briefly of the day to come, not to worry about it, but to note its possibility. There would be small tasks, perhaps a broken hinge to ease, a neighbor who would need a jar opened, a seed to be put into soil. There would be more chances to bind the tiny frayed things of other people. The thought of that work made her smile in her sleep's verge, for she liked nothing better than the steady practice of care. Her eyelids grew heavier in the particular way that only sleep's first slide brings. She hummed the tune one last time, slower now, as if to lay it into the quilt with herself, and the last thing she heard before her breath matched the lamp's pulse was the sand's thin whisper and the lighthouse's calm, approving voice. The prisms on the seam caught a last bright suggestion of the lamp and threw it gently across the room like a benediction. Outside, the night kept its distance. Ice pressed softly at the panes in a way that suggested curiosity rather than threat. The sea, hidden beyond the headland, held its own, a muted companion. Inside, the lantern stood proud and mended, a seam made into ornament, a small imperfection turned into evidence of community. The common room's lamps burned low. Seamus's coat hung on its peg, a small island of salt and smell. Rose's plant slept in its cloth as if in a rowboat on a still river. The twins' basket of spare prisms waited under the bench for new play. The house was a constellation of small beacons, each lamp a human light, and the lighthouse above them all hummed its steady note. If your own lamp is already low and the room about you is soft, then breathe with Lily a few times, long in, long out. Imagine the prisms turning the lamp's amber into little safe stars. Let the lantern hum be the rhythm that quiets the day's small clamor. It is an ordinary kind of miracle, the sort that doesn't shout but keeps. It is the knowledge that when a seam appears, there are hands to stitch, friends to bring thread, children to hang prisms, and a little band of people who will make something of the repair worth celebrating. The lighthouse keeps its watch. Inside it, life moves in small rituals and greater kindness. The seam that had held a trouble now held a garland. The lantern that had coughed out a worry now shone like a promise. Lily slept because she had given and received, because the work had been done together, and because in the end the world, though vast and cold, had a place such as theirs, warm, lit, attended. If the thought of this little house and its lamp brought you any comfort this evening, you might carry that calm forward in your own small ways. A quiet follow helps keep these stories coming, so we can gather again by soft light. Rest well, safe inside the storm, held by the hum of the lantern and the slow, sure stitch of friends.